Alright, guys. So we got to talk about this channel. Here's the deal. Alright. Now, this guy does not understand very much about the law. Alright. So I'm going to try to go ahead and explain some of these things to you guys. Alright. So we're just going to watch a few minutes of this, and then I'm going to start showing other videos that are going to properly explain why he's wrong. You know what I'm saying? So it's not just coming from me. All right.
School and a cop pulls you over, what they tell you?
Pull over when it's safe to do.
No, you pull over immediately because I don't know what you're doing inside this car. Hiding guns, you know what I mean? Because I don't know what you're doing inside this car. And officer safety is number one.
Officer safety is number one.
No guns inside the car and no weapons on you. I mean, the car looks clean. What do you got right there up front?
Go ahead, step out, man.
Now, that part, he's going to say that that is wrong. That's the only thing they care about. Uh, that's not actually accurate. All right. That should be the only thing you care about is officer safety. All right. If the officer feels threatened in any way, that is a good way for you to get hurt. All right. It is in your best interest and the best interest of the officer as well. For everyone, uh, do not appear to be threatening a officer. It is in everyone's best interest that you do not appear threatening. All right. That is a good way to get seriously hurt.
No weapons on you like that? Nah. All right, I'm gonna take you out like this just to check, okay? Go and fist that one for me. So you're not, like law enforcement, right? You're not a law enforcement officer?
We live in a strange time. The schmucks in Congress pretend to be worried about Americans being spied on and having their data collected by China, while the United States' own NSA, CIA, and FBI not only spy on us through our devices, but propagandize us through media outlets that they've controlled for over 5 decades. We also have cops in our streets, 700 to 850,000 of them, pretending to be our servants while they brutalize and extort us like we're chattel on a plantation. What's alarming about this?
Oh, wow. You know, I didn't even catch that when I first watched this. All right. You know, he's really comparing being subjected to a traffic stop to actual slaves. That is absurd. All right. That's beyond ridiculous. All right. Also, he fails to see the bigger picture. Uh, you know, if you're driving, right, and someone runs a stop sign, slams into you, and then you find out they don't have insurance. And then, let's just imagine, previously, they had been stopped, the officer ran their information and found out they didn't have insurance, but because they promised they would get insurance, they just let them go. They said, that's fine, just take care of that, get insurance on your car, right? They never did. Now, they can't afford to pay you for the damages. They also can't pay for your hospital bills. All right? So, are you now going to put the blame on that officer who let that person go and didn't force them to get insurance? All right? Because I can tell you this. If you don't have insurance, you will get a court date. You will have to go to court and you will have to complete things that they want you to do. I've been through that myself. All right. You know, poverty is a very difficult thing. when your choices are pay the rent or car insurance, I mean, who's really going to say, yeah, I'll pay the car insurance so I'm not driving illegally and I'll just live in my car? How many people are going to say that? No, you're going to pay your rent so you have a place to live, and then you're going to say, I just hope I don't get pulled over. All right. It's a terrible thing. But, you know, a lot of people drive without insurance simply because they can't afford it. When you're living in poverty, 9 times out of 10, you're not paying for your car insurance. All right, that's just a fact. And if you are, then I'm going to say, great job. I'm really glad that you're taking care of that. All right. But the simple fact is, you know, I couldn't imagine any cop anywhere finding out someone doesn't have insurance and not giving them a court date. All right. That is not going to happen. You know, officers have an obligation to enforce the law. They also have an obligation to make sure you're not breaking any laws. And a good chance to find that out is when you get pulled over. They do need probable cause before they can start going through your things, before they can start doing any of that. They need probable cause first. All right. And if you're not answering their questions, guess what? You've just given them their probable cause. Because now you appear like you're hiding something. All right. So that's all the probable cause they need. If they ask you a simple question, where are you headed tonight? You say, I don't have to tell you anything. Guess what? Just giving them everything they need, right, to make sure you're not hiding anything. That's just the way it goes. If you answer their questions and there's nothing obvious to them that, okay, something's wrong here, something is up, right, then you're good. So it's better to cooperate with them. It really is. If you're not doing anything wrong, then cooperate with them. If you've got nothing to hide, then don't be trying to hide stuff. Right? You know, prostitution is illegal. So if they pull over someone and it looks like they have a prostitute with them, they have the right to ask you about that. To say, do you know this person? Do you know her? Do you know her last name? Do you know how old she is? They have the right to ask you those questions. Especially if she looks, you know, like she's not old enough to be out there doing that kind of stuff. Don't you think they should be asking those questions? Like, just imagine this is like a 16 or 17-year-old girl and she's out there doing that kind of stuff. Don't you think the cops should ask them about that? Come on now. Like, at a certain point, you have to start realizing a lot of crimes are prevented or stopped because the police are there to investigate and make things right. You know what I'm saying? So, if you are in opposition with every aspect of the law, you're gonna have a hard time in life. You just are. And my advice would be to you at that point, just don't drive. Let someone else drive you, because if you're driving a car, you have to expect that at some point or another, you're going to be in contact with law enforcement. All right? I mean, it could be anything. A broken tail light, your license plate isn't illuminated. I've had that happen before. You know, you're driving along, a stop sign is obscured, you didn't see it, you blew through it, you get pulled over. All right? it is probably going to happen. Like, I couldn't imagine very many people drive their entire life and never get stopped by the police. All right. It's one of those things that is going to happen. So if you're in this boat that is like, I'm going to oppose law enforcement at every single turn, just don't drive. You know what I'm saying? It's just that simple. That's going to make things so much better for you in the long run. You know, I think a lot of people don't really understand this. All right. Driving is a privilege. It is not a right. No one has the right to drive a vehicle. And the reason why is because when you're driving a car, you could potentially become an obstacle that could cause damage to another vehicle, right? As I said before, a stop sign is obscured. Maybe you're going a little bit too fast. Maybe the road's wet. You know, and you're a new driver. You're not familiar with how fast you're supposed to go when it's raining, right? So you accidentally blow through a stop sign because you couldn't stop because the roads were wet. Well, guess what? Now there's a whole family coming towards you, right? They plow right into you. That wouldn't have happened if you weren't on the road. All right. That is why you have to have a driver's license. You know, you can't just go out and drive and say, well, I'm not bothering anybody, right? Because you could. You very well could take other people's lives, especially if you don't know what you're doing. All right. You know, you really have to think about other people. It's not just you on the road. All right. Let's watch a few minutes of this, and then I'm going to show you why he's wrong.
This is that many of the people being extorted are staunch supporters of this Thin Blue Line gang. These uniformed circus clowns live and act exactly like you would expect any domestic terrorist to live and act. So it's imperative that we talk about videos like this because we got to get down into the core of our being that these boys in blue are not our friends. They act like our friends, but only long enough to extract information from us. Information that they'll use against us in the corporately controlled court of the twisted halls of the injustice system. This video, former special agent arrested for FBI credentials, Carson Sheriffs, has gone viral. And I'm not going to beat a dead horse because others have commented on it. But I did want to
Here's the whole problem with this. All right. If you're not doing anything wrong, then you really, in most cases, you really don't have anything to worry about. All right. They are not going to conduct an investigation like they did for this guy. All right. If there wasn't anything obvious that he had these types of lights in his car, would it have went down this way? All right. You know, but like I said, they have an obligation. They are doing their job. They have to enforce the law. And the law says you cannot have certain types of lights that could make other people think that you're law enforcement. Whether you have them on or not, you cannot install them on your vehicle. So that is the law. Because he was not currently law enforcement, he couldn't have them. He would have to take them off. All right. You know, probably just pulling a fuse out, probably just making it so that they cannot come on whatsoever. That might have been okay, but because they were functional, guess what? You can't be driving like that. You know what I'm saying? And like I said before, you know, what you don't realize is, yes, sometimes they come down on the driver, but they could be at the same time protecting someone else, serving and protecting someone else who this person might have turned around and hurt and caused damage to them. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, we can't look at everything as one dimensional, right? There's always a bigger picture. We have to take everything in.
Take note of some of the segments in this video that we all need to tuck away into our memory banks. First off, one of the most precious, unalienable rights, that's a right that you can't put a lien on, that nobody's given you and nobody can take from you. One of the most precious rights you have is the right to remain silent, to not engage in a conversation you don't want to be a part of. So shut your mouth and stop talking. Unless you know how to navigate the dangerous waters you're now a part of, because you're the subject of a traffic stop. So unless you know what you're doing, zip your lip. The next thing is, this cop is going to...
That's another thing we're going to address. All right. He does not understand what the right to remain silent actually means. Like, he understands the fundamentals of it. You don't have to talk. But I think he's under the impression that if you tell them, I have the right to remain silent, I don't have to talk, that means they'll say, okay, you're free to go then, right? That's not how that works. That does not mean you can't be subjected to prosecution, all right? It is not a get out of jail free card. You know, watch interrogations. Watch whenever you read them their rights and then they say, I don't want to talk. Then watch what happens, right? Does that mean they get to go home? No, it doesn't. It just means the interrogation's over. Now it's time to go to your jail cell. Assuming that they have enough to press charges on them, to send them to jail. You know, but they're going to do an interrogation. They want to see, is this person going to confess? Or are we going to have to take this to trial? Right? So, that's what that is. They want to see if you're going to end up telling them the truth. Right? So, if they don't, and they say, you know what, I don't have to talk to you. I have the right to remain silent, right? That is my right, and I'm using it. It doesn't mean that they can't cooperate, because they can. They can waive that right if they choose to. All right? But, like I said, if they say I don't have to talk to you, that's totally fine. They don't have to. Well, they'll still go to trial. But frankly, it's better if they do that with an attorney. That is what they should do, and that's part of the thing. You know, if you don't have an attorney, one will be appointed to you. That is in their rights. That is for criminal law, though. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. And they get the two mixed up. So you definitely have to be aware whenever you hear things like that you understand that that pertains to criminal law or it doesn't. Right? So then you have to figure out, okay, what does this right pertain to? Right? You have a lot more rights when it comes to criminal law. You know, so he is just totally wrong about this. And I'm going to try and show you guys why you don't want to have this kind of attitude. It does not work. All right? If they suspect that you're committing crimes, they have the right to investigate that. All right? It's just that simple. And if you tell them, I'm not going to answer any of your questions, you've just given them, like I said, everything they need to go ahead and place you under arrest, whatever else they want to do. All right? Also, if they ask you, do you consent to have your car searched? There's a lot of misconceptions about this as well. You don't have to give them the consent. You can say, no, I don't feel comfortable with that. I'm not allowing you to search my car. And I've had that happen before. I've had an officer ask me about searching my car. You know what I said? That's totally fine. If you want to search it and if it'll make you feel better, there's nothing in here that I'm worried about. So that's totally fine. Like, if that's, I was like, if you feel that's necessary, then okay. All right. They didn't search my car. But I told them that was totally fine. He could if he wanted to. If I had told him, no, you're not searching my car, what they would have done at that point, they would have called out for a canine who would have been a drug sniffing dog. Right? If the dog hints at something, they then have all the probable cause they need to search your vehicle. All right? But they have to get that first. But that's if there's no obvious signs, if there's no smells. If they pull you over and they see, weed smoke everywhere, they can smell the weed, that's a totally different story. All right. But if you're just looking like you're really nervous and like something ain't quite right, that's when they may call a canine out to sniff your car. All right. If the canine doesn't pick up at anything, then they can't search your car. They don't have probable cause. Now, if they do search your car, if the canine didn't pick up on anything, but they did find something, they place you under arrest, you now have a leg to stand on. As long as there's some kind of videotape showing that, hey, the dog didn't pick up anything. They still searched my car. I still got arrested for, a little bit of weed in my pocket or whatever else, right? You'll have a leg to stand on because you can show the court they wasn't right. This was not a legal arrest. And hopefully, you get a judge who's willing to look at that. They'll throw it out. Absolutely, they'll throw that case out. Our judicial system definitely isn't perfect, but it's not all wrong either. All right. Everything is not set up against the people. Some things are for sure. All right. Are we making progress? Definitely. There's now a lot of regulations for officers wearing body cameras, right? And I think that needs to continue. I am not one who's going to always back the police. That's definitely not what's happening here. All right. They make a lot of mistakes, and when they do make mistakes, I want them to be held accountable. But we need to be fair about it too. You know what I'm saying?
Tell all of us, including the court, the judge, the jury, the entire world, what the most important thing is in his mind. And we need to comprehend that he means what he says. The most important thing to this cop, and probably all cops, is not your rights. It's not your security. It's officer safety. So let's take a listen.
That is wrong. Your rights are very important. Okay? Because they can get in serious trouble if they violate your rights. All right? So that is not something that they would take lightly. It's just the fact that some people don't understand what their rights are. Is why they think that. So basically, what he's saying here is shut up at traffic stops. If you don't say anything at all, they'll just let you go, right? He's not going to tell us anything. It's a waste of time. Just let him go. No, that is not what's going to happen. And I'm going to show you that right now. You know, instead of listening to rhetoric like this, it would be much better to watch other people go through this with this mentality and see what happens. The results are never good. They're never going to say, oh, this person's not going to tell us anything, you're free to go. That's not going to happen. All right. It's really not.
Adam Feldman with the Feldman Law Firm. What I want to talk to you about today, we're getting a lot of questions about the difference really between reasonable suspicion and probable cause as it relates to the criminal world, more specifically trafficking.
Now, I'm pulling up videos from, other people because I'm not totally confident in everything I know. I know the basics. I understand the fundamentals, right? But that's about it. And that is why I'm not going to rely only on my knowledge. I'm going to look for other people who knows more than I do. All right. So this is coming from the Fetterman Law Firm. So it looks like, these are actual attorneys, and that's what I pulled up because I wanted to hear from people who actually know the law. All right.
Traffic stops, but it does bleed into different aspects. So I want to kind of cover this in the best way so that anybody else who's not a lawyer.
Also, one thing I want to point out here, if an officer violates your rights and places you under arrest that is not lawful, don't fight it. Let them arrest you. You are not going to make things any easier or better if you fight them. Okay? That is going to weaken the leg you have to stand on in court. What you want to do, you want to tell them, I will be filing a complaint. And leave it at that. Let them arrest you, but you make that clear, I'm going to be filing a complaint. So anything you've done wrong, it'll be brought to light. That officer now has the chance to sit back and think, have I made any mistakes here? Is everything on the up and up? Is everything by the book? Maybe they'll start thinking, wait a minute, something ain't right here. I could get in trouble for this or that. I'm just going to back off. They might do that. All right. But a lot of times they're not. A lot of times they're just going to arrest you anyways. Because they believe in the thin blue line. That you protect your brothers no matter what. I really hate that sentiment. I don't like it. All right. But that's the mentality of a lot of these guys. It just is. Like I said before, I'm not always in defense of police. All right. I'm in defense of good police, and I'm in offense of bad police. We have to make that distinction here. There's a lot of bad officers out there. A lot of them. But, to put it simply, if you're being placed under arrest that isn't lawful, tell it to the judge. Tell it to your attorney, and fight it. Hopefully, there's enough evidence that the court will see and they will rule in your favor. That cop is now on the hook. All right? That's the way you need to do it. Fight your battles in the courtroom by the law, by the book. Everything in the book is not written to be against us. It just isn't. That is a misconception. There's a lot of cases that get thrown out because the cops didn't know the law. All right. So, I think more knowledge and understanding is necessary here.
And the problem is that the difference between the two is actually, it's a very, very thin line. There's not that much of a difference between the two when considering what's what. So the way it really breaks down is reasonable suspicion is the lowest level of a legal standard where police can really do anything. And the idea is it's associated with a stop and frisk. So reasonable suspicion is nothing more than an articulable suspicion. So it's not a hunch. I mean, when you think of a hunch, you're just saying, that guy looks like he might be up to no good. And that doesn't count for reasonable suspicion. It's just that little step more. So, I mean, the cops will incorporate a whole lot of information that most of the time really is bogus. But for example, you are in a quote unquote high crime neighborhood, which to most of us means nothing. That could be my neighborhood that has since been branded.
So this is where this gets really complicated.
By some police officer as high crime, and therefore they now have this reasonable suspicion to do what? To stop you. They can stop you and say, hey man, you know, what's going on? What's happening here? Now at this level of reasonable suspicion, that's really what allows the officer to start saying, you know, I want to frisk you. I want to check you for drugs, something to that effect. So it incorporates the totality of circumstances. It's based off of an idea, but something that this police officer has to be able to articulate. High crime neighborhood. The individual potential suspect is looking suspicious, sweating a lot when you're in the middle of the winter, you know, just because the police came up, you know, eyes darting back and forth. These are things, I mean, I haven't described anything that's criminal, but this is all reasonable suspicion that the police officer can articulate when it comes down to stopping you. And when that stop takes place, they then have the ability to arguably frisk you, check for drugs, check for firearms, you know, what have you. But the biggest question here for anybody who is subject to a reasonable suspicion, frisk or stop or anything like that is, am I being detained? That should always be the first question, because just because a police officer interacts with you, just because a police officer comes to you and says, hey man, what's going on? Or hey, can I check you for drugs? Or hey, do you have a gun on you? These are simply questions. Police can go around the neighborhood asking people questions. It doesn't mean that you have to comply. And so with reasonable suspicion, this gives them that next step to actually detain you. So it's very important for anybody who's interacting with police.
Now, to be fair, if you don't comply with them, they're probably going to go ahead and detain you. That's just the way it's going to work. All right.
To very politely and very calmly ask, hey, am I being detained? If they don't answer the question, you are not being detained and you can walk away. If they tell you that you are being detained, well, the best advice is to comply. Because if
Right.
they're detaining you and then you start running away, giving reason for chase, you're really only going to compound the circumstances and probably put yourself in some more trouble. So reasonable suspicion is articulable facts that allow this officer to really just stop you, quote unquote, detain you, ask you some questions, frisk you even, check for drugs, weapons, or any criminal contraband. After, and this is really important, reasonable suspicion alone, you cannot arrest somebody. That's probably the biggest distinction between where we're going next, which is now probable cause. So reasonable suspicion, you can walk up to somebody, frisk, ask questions, but you cannot arrest on reasonable suspicion alone.
And what he's saying right here, it is not a crime to look suspicious. All right. You know, I might be walking down the street and appear like I'm really nervous, I'm sweating a lot, something just doesn't look right. That is not a crime. You can't arrest me for that. You could have reasonable suspicion that something is going on with me and start asking me questions. But at that point, that's about it. Now, if I refuse to answer your questions, that turns into probable cause. That turns into, okay, this guy's obviously hiding something. Let's go ahead and detain him. Let's find out what he's hiding. That's just the way it's going to work.
Then we move to probable cause. Now, this is where things can start getting a little hairy for the suspect, because at the time of probable cause, now we're really invoking the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. You know, we are all free from search and from seizure to be secure in our person, our houses, papers, effects, all those things associated with the Fourth Amendment, and we have that freedom. But probable cause allows the officer to move past that and effectuate an arrest. Then they can do a search warrant. They can seize your property with probable cause. So this is the idea of how this works. A traffic stop, you know, and we always deal with this a lot with DUIs. Police officers pull you over, and more often than not, it's for, let's say, speeding or an expired, registration, something that is civil, right? They can't ask you to get out of the car simply because they pulled you over. Just because you're there for a speeding ticket, that gives them right to say, hey, let me see your license and registration. So they have probable cause at that point, really only to believe that you committed a civil traffic infraction. So they're only allowed to act according to that. So civil traffic infraction. And then what we always see is it moves from, I pulled you over for a speeding ticket, to now I have probable cause or even reasonable suspicion of a DUI. That's what we always see. So an officer pokes his head in, starts sniffing around, looks at your eyes, they're bloodshot, watery, asks you some questions, you're now talking, and he can smell the alcohol on your breath. He can see that your face is a little flushed.
And what's important to understand here, if he doesn't see any of those things, then he cannot, get you out of the car, give you a sobriety. He can't do any of that stuff. He has to have probable cause, right? He has to have some credible evidence that he can see or he can smell that tells him this person might be under the influence, right? They may be doing something wrong. I see something in the floorboard looks like a gun, right? I see something. I see a bottle of pills in the back seat. And yes, they can look into your car. So if you're under the impression that they can't use their flashlights and look through your windows, you are totally wrong, right? They can do that. And that isn't so much of a fishing expedition. That is so that they're prepared in case there is someone looking suspicious back there. You know what I'm saying? If there's someone who looks on edge and looks like they're ready to pounce, they're going to want to be ready for that. You know what I'm saying? Because like I said, you don't want to make the officers nervous. Absolutely not. That is a great way to get yourself hurt, get someone else hurt. Don't do that. Don't be fidgety. Don't be jumping around. All of your movements need to be slow and deliberate. All right? I'm going to reach over and I'm going to get in the glove box. Don't just go do it really quick. You know why? They could think, here we go, it's on. Think of it like this. You go out to the jungle and a lion approaches. That lion may not attack because you don't appear to be threatening, right? But if that lion views you as a threat, they're probably going to pounce and they're probably going to take your life. All right? That's just how it goes. Don't give these officers a reason to think something is wrong, that you're getting ready to attack them. Don't do it. It's not going to work out for you.
You can tell that your words sound a little slow or slurred. You are now building reasonable suspicion, which is eventually going to turn to probable cause, and this is how this works. So at that point, the officer says, well, why don't you step on out of the car? He doesn't have to tell you why, but in his mind, he has to know why. Well, I smelled alcohol in the breath, bloodshot, watery eyes, slurred speech. It's got that reasonable suspicion that you might be committing a DUI. You get out of the car, and he starts doing these tests. The eye test, where he's got that pen, and you're supposed to follow it with your eyes, or the walk and turn, or the touch your nose, or do your ABCs, all of that stuff. What he's doing is he took a reasonable suspicion of a DUI, simply the smell of alcohol, and he's turning it into probable cause for arrest. And that's why we always tell everybody, if you're ever stopped for a DUI, you crack the window, you give them your license and registration, because you don't want to give the police officer probable cause. It's okay if they have, it's okay if they stopped you for a civil traffic violation. They have to let you go, give you the citation and let you go. But the more interaction you have with police, which you don't have to do, gives them probable cause to ultimately arrest you. So reasonable suspicion starts off with that smell, and then the officer starts doing all of these tests, and he's taking notes. All right, he missed his, he lost his balance on the stand on one leg. He can't touch his nose, right on the nose. He's an inch off. His eyes, he's showing cues of nystagmus, meaning your eyes are showing that you're...
Now, one distinction to make here. Let's assume that maybe they stopped him under suspicion of driving under the influence. All right. Let's say he was swerving, he was unsteady, he keeps going over the center line, and then he jerks back into his lane or something else, right? Or his speed isn't steady, right? He keeps speeding up and slowing down, right? He's having trouble controlling his vehicle, right? So the police would stop you under suspicion of driving under the influence. All right. In that case, they already have the probable cause to conduct a field sobriety test. So by you saying, nah, I don't want to deal with you, I'm just going to crack my window, give you the information, run that, and I'll be on my way. That's not the way that's going to work out. They already have the probable cause. All right. So they're then going to tell you, we need to have you step out of the car so we can do a sobriety test. If you refuse that sobriety test, they're probably going to go ahead and arrest you. So that's how that's going to work. But what he's saying here, if you don't give them probable cause, then you're going to be fine, right? And that's totally fine advice, but once they have the probable cause, whether it's real or not, whether they just think there's probable cause but there really isn't, you still have to comply. Like if they make that demand, okay, you need to get out of the car, don't fight with them at that point. The game is over. You know what I'm saying? Once they tell you, get out of the car, the game is up. All right. You are not going to just go away and get out of that situation. All right. You are probably going to be arrested at that point. The best thing you can do, let them arrest you. You're going to make things so much better for you. Especially if the police are wrong. Their police are not always right. And if they're not right, then, like I said before, let them arrest you and inform them. I will be filing a complaint. I need your badge number. I need all your information. tell them what is going on. All right. You can do that while they're arresting you. All right. You can tell them you have violated my rights, just so you're aware of what's going to happen next. Once I get in front of the judge, I'm going to tell them what you've done here today was violate my constitutional rights. Simple as that. And like I said, hopefully you get a judge who's willing to look at everything, and maybe they'll rule in your favor.
Prepared, things like that. All of a sudden, he is just putting each one of these things, and he now has probable cause. So probable cause allows him to do that seizure of you, which is putting you under arrest. So that's really my attempt to describe the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause so everybody can understand it. Reasonable.
Another thing that I need to point out here is their ability to search your vehicle without a search warrant. Okay? If you are being arrested, they then have probable cause that you might have discarded evidence in your vehicle somewhere that you don't want them to find. That's how they reach that. They get probable cause from that. Okay? That he might have stashed something in the car. So we're going to search his car. They're also going to impound your vehicle. And by doing that, they need to take inventory of everything that's in that vehicle. So there's two parts to that search that they're doing, right? In other words, if you have things in your car you don't want police to know about, don't drive around with that stuff in your car, all right? If you get pulled over and you have, drugs in the glove compartment or whatever else, then don't give them probable cause to do any further investigation. Stick to the facts of why they pulled you over, just deal with that, and be on your way. If you don't give them probable cause, then they can't open the door to that. All right? Unless they smell something, unless, your behavior looks off, unless you look really nervous about something, that's what's going to start giving them, as he said, reasonable suspicion. All right? That's when they may start asking you more and more questions. It's not going to get you out of it by telling them, I don't have to answer any of your questions. That's not going to work.
Reasonable suspicion is good for a stop. It's good to ask some questions, even frisk somebody, not enough to arrest. But then they have to start building their case to create probable cause. And truth is that you are the one who's giving them that evidence when it comes to a DUI stop, for example, by continuing to do the tests, by continuing to speak with them, doing all of these things that you don't have to do simply because they're asking. So I hope this helps clear up the difference between reasonable suspicion, probable cause. It is a difficult legal standard to really break down and to truly understand, but if you have...
So here's the thing. If you deny to do their test, right, it depends on the reason why they wanted to conduct that test in the first place. If they saw you swerving and not able to control your vehicle properly, they don't need to do that test in order to arrest you. They can pull you over and arrest you without doing the sobriety test. You've already shown them, they've already seen that there's probable cause to assume this person is under the influence of something or something is wrong. We need to fix this problem, right? That's how that works. But let's assume it was just a standard traffic stop. The situation that he's talking about, if nothing is obvious to them, right? They don't smell alcohol, there's no like your eyes are watery or bloodshot or whatever else, uh, and they just have a hunch, right, that this person might be on something. If there's no obvious signs that that's the case, then they don't have probable cause. And if you deny to do their test at that point, then there's nothing they could do about it. They would need some probable cause to conduct that sobriety test. All right. If they pull you over for just a regular, if it is just a standard traffic stop, and they see any of these signs, you are not in a position at that point to deny their test and drive away. That's not going to happen. They have the probable cause. If you deny to take the test, they're going to go ahead and arrest you. And then from there, they'll either do a blood test, they'll get court orders, right, to conduct whatever test they want at that point. All right. So that's how that's going to work. So understand the circumstances that you're in. If you want to understand, is this officer violating my rights? Then you have to know, okay, I have been drinking, so I know my eyes are probably bloodshot. I know my words are probably slurred. You have to think about these things. So at that point, he's asking for me to get out of the car and do a sobriety test. I'm not just going to get out of this by denying to do that. At that point, I'll just be arrested. All right. So you have to understand that. If there's no obvious signs that you can think of, and he's asking you to do a sobriety test, then you might be able to get out of it just by saying, no, I don't want to do that. You don't have probable cause. Unless you could tell me right now that you have probable cause and tell me what it is, then I'm going to deny it, and you will have to let me go. At that point, they might say, you're under arrest, we have probable cause, you've denied, you're going to jail. So that's a possibility too. It is really important that you guys understand the circumstances that you're in. All right. If you don't understand them, then just cooperate. All right. If the cops make a mistake, deal with it in court. Get an attorney and deal with it with them. You can explain to your attorney, I think they made a lot of mistakes here. Your attorney will find out. All right. So that's where you need to fight the battle. Fighting with the police isn't going to make things any better. You're definitely not going to get out of it that way. You're still going to be arrested. Now, this is just part one. There's going to be other parts to this. All right. And just as a warning, we're going to watch people with this mentality deal with the police, and it is not going to go well for them. I have already seen a lot of videos like this, and what we're talking about is sovereign citizens. All right. Whether this person claims that or not, that's the type of rhetoric I would expect to come from sovereign citizens. Okay. It doesn't work. There's no legal precedent for sovereign citizenship. You're not going to walk into a courtroom and tell them I'm a sovereign citizen and they say, okay, you're free to go. That is not going to happen. You have to realize you live in the United States. Okay? You are subjected to the rules to live here. Imagine you go home for spring break, right? And you're an adult and everything else. And then, just to go home, spend some time with your family and all this. And you tell your dad, you know what? I know you want me to not use any foul language in the house and not do drugs and this and that, but I have rights. You can't impede on my rights to live life how I want. So that's what I'm going to do. Then he's going to tell you, then you can go somewhere else. I don't have to let you in my house. You live in my house, you abide by my rules. It's as simple as that. All right? That is the same thing here. You live in the United States, you are subjected to the rules that all of our citizens have to abide by. There's no magical way out of it. If you guys really think there's something to this, show me the video. Show me the footage or someone finding legal precedent for these things to exist. That if you are a sovereign citizen, then they can't prosecute you for this or for that or whatever else. That's not the way it goes. That's not how it works. You know, it's also really odd. They claim to be a sovereign citizen and say that the rules don't apply to them. But then they also complain about their rights not being upheld. So if you're not a citizen of the United States, then why are you complaining about your rights not being upheld? If that's the case, you don't have protections under the United States. But that's a falsehood. You do have those rights whether you claim them or not. If you are a citizen of the United States, then guess what? You have rights that are given to every citizen in the United States. There's nothing you have to do to gain those rights. The only thing you need to do is exist. So I have rights, you have rights, your neighbor has rights, even if he doesn't think he does. He still has rights. At the same time, we all also have to abide by the laws and regulations of the land that we live in. It's the same for driving a car. You have to abide by the laws of the road, just like your neighbor does, just like his neighbor does. So, alright, that's it for now, y'all.